Hi, I'm Teresa Blandino.
I'm Danny Zuniga.
I'm Hunter Johnston, and we will be discussing 4 different articles that portray 4 different points of view for evaluating the literary merit of Upton Sinclair's The Jungle.
In Teaching the Good, Russ Castronova poses the question of whether or not it is worth it to teach a book that has poor writing style in the form of propaganda, but which has significant historical ramifications.
So what strikes me most about this article is how it equally portrays the arguments for and against the jungle's literary merit. It's very unbiased. And this quote portrays the main conflict about the propaganda in the jungle and asks the question, does it detract from the educational value too much, or is the propaganda artfully done in its good intent?
Well, I think like art, or like at least like really good art, the author or creator should present just a viewpoint and then have the reader interpret it how they want and take away from it their own thoughts and ideas. But in The Jungle, Sinclair, he kind of forces a viewpoint on you in the end, and I think that really narrows the interpretation that the reader can get out of it.
So you're in agreement with what this article is interpreting?
Yes.
But then, like, counter to that, we could also argue that propaganda could be art in that it presents a viewpoint in an artful manner through characters and through a plot. And even though that people say that this is a one-sided type of novel, there are still many interpretations, just like the fact that there was a meat reform brought about by this article, which was intended to be for social reform instead.
So within the narrow confines of what people perceive as the propaganda narrowing people's viewpoints towards a certain conclusion, they really didn't get out of that because The Jungle had a good intent of being this giant reform for working men, and we got meat reform out of it.
Yeah, suggesting that there's various interpretations still.
Yes. Castronova concludes his article by stating that we should eat contaminated sausage every once in a while, or else in regards to The Jungle, he's basically saying it may be a good novel, it may be a poorly written novel, but it can still teach us something, and so it still has literary merit in that way.
Yeah, and this also kind of leads to the idea that even though people consider The Jungle as bad, it's still good in the sense that Sinclair had an idea of how socialism can benefit the lives of the workers in the United States, and how he used propaganda in the end so there actually would be little interpretation to the ideas that he was putting across, and he didn't want people to interpret it because he wanted people to take his stance and agree with him so he could further the state of the workers in the United States. So his propaganda is art in a way.
So this article serves to introduce the topic of the literary merit of The Jungle, and the next 3 articles we're going to be speaking on will go into further detail on whether or not The Jungle deserves all the literary credit it has received.
Inescapably Propaganda by Christopher Taylor proposes the idea that The Jungle is actually a very well-written novel if you look at it through the right perspective.
And so Christopher Taylor proposes that critics of Sinclair have taken the wrong perspective in viewing The Jungle, and he claims that they're trying to put him in a box in which he doesn't fit this naturalistic tendency of writing. And Sinclair, rather than being naturalistic, seems to fit into another style of writing.
And that style of writing would be an exemplum. And what an exemplum is writing that seeks to validate a political philosophy. And it often does so by focusing on portraying one specific meaning. And in The Jungle, what would that be?
Well, his meaning is that socialism can improve the lives of the workers, and he uses the entire plot as evidence because the Rudkiss family goes through hardship throughout their entire time in Packingtown and beyond. Everybody dies, people lose fingers, people get eaten by rats, and he uses all this as evidence to the fact that socialism can fix all of these problems, which is what you get at the end, which is why it is an exemplum.
So the purpose of an exemplum is to present the author's point of view, and Sinclair is able to do this through what we call free and direct discourse.
And what is free and direct discourse, Danny?
Well, I will tell you, Teresa. Free and direct discourse is when the narrator is able to speak through characters in the novel, and we see this with Sinclair in breaks with certain characters like dialogue, in that it becomes more sophisticated and there's an ambiguity as to who's speaking at that point, because he presents it as Yurgis said or Ona said, and so he sort of imposes his ideas on these characters and allows them to present them so that it becomes more credible.
So it's basically a rhetorical analysis of Sinclair's literary writing.
Yes, exactly. So this rhetorical device allows him to add some credibility to his ideas, because now the ideas seem to stem from characters that are actually experiencing things rather than coming from an outside narrator voice.
And so it's basically like him manipulating his writing, so it's not just him forcing himself on everyone and becoming this annoying little talking man into everyone's ear. It's him cleverly spawning his voice off onto other characters, so we're just like subconsciously getting the message. And
Yes.
that's really cool, isn't it, Hunter?
Yeah, I think it really strengthens his writing, because instead of just lecturing and handing out pamphlets and like yelling on a soapbox, he uses other people and their experiences, which we perceive as real, because we're seeing this family go through these hard times, and then they're saying these things instead of Sinclair just telling you points. It brings more depth into his argument.
And it takes away from, I know that a lot of what people think about, especially the last half of his book, is, oh my gosh, this is getting so boring. It's him lecturing and lecturing over and over. But this gives me a new appreciation for what he did. Like, it's really clever how he worked his way into the book through his writing. And so I feel like this is a good argument for his literary merit, because it's quite a clever writing style. And whereas Inescapably Propaganda argued for Sinclair's literary merit, a note on Upton Sinclair's The Jungle by Gupta makes the more traditional arguments against Sinclair's writing. However, Gupta still has a slightly benevolent view of Sinclair, because Gupta is trying to stop people from categorizing Sinclair into extremes, saying his writing isn't just good or isn't just bad. This quote here portrays why Sinclair is a good writer, and I'm just wondering if you guys agree with what it's saying.
Yeah, I definitely agree, because Sinclair wrote with a purpose. He wrote for humanity. He wanted to make a connection with people and better their lives, which that purpose makes his writing art, I believe.
And so in saying this, this article classifies him as a humanist and says that he writes art for life's sake. And there's a quote that captures this really well, and it says, "He is more than a mere writer and less than a serious novelist." And they say it's because while his novel may be lacking in literary quality, it's not his intention to be a great writer and be recognized for his literature, but rather seeks to bring about a social change.
And so basically another quote from this article was that he does art for life's sake. He does art to reach out to people. His mode of art is writing, and by connecting to people, by being driven by emotions, by making people feel with his passion and his compassion for his subject, he himself and his propaganda is good. It is good literary writing. On the flip side, Gupta argues that Sinclair's propaganda is poor literary form. It's just this giant mess that spills over anything good he did in his writing previously in the book.
Yeah, I really agree with that point, because throughout the beginning of the book, you're following around Yurgis and the Rutgers family, and you're going through their hard times, and you get really invested into this plot. But then, towards the end of the novel, you're completely separated from the plot, and you're mostly just getting lectured at by these characters that Sinclair creates to promote his socialist stance. And I just think that makes the whole book, or at least just the ending, poorly written.
But isn't that but that definitely is the point of view of a reader that's just kind of chugging along. But that's very superficial, especially in an article that's supposed to be analyzing the jungle. It should be deeper, like the rest of the articles. And here it's just a superficial, oh, the common naysayer, oh, poor, bad, naughty Upton Sinclair, he's messing up anything good he did. Like, I don't agree with that.
I definitely don't think they give him the credit he deserves, especially like as we saw in previous articles. There's definitely deeper ways to look at his novel. Like he does go about it in a very artful manner, as we saw with the free and direct discourse and things of that nature. So I think by just discrediting his whole novel based on just this slightly inconsistent ending is really doing him an injustice.
So you don't think that it's bad art just because his form is poor. You think it's good art regardless of how his form is because of the purpose he was trying to get across.
Exactly. So it's good art because he is able to reach that purpose. Even though there's a slight break, it's not completely inconsistent because we still are following along Jurgis in the end. And it still stays true to all the characters and true to the plot. And so he is able to get across this message of socialism.
So you think the propaganda, instead of spilling over the artistic framework, actually is embedded within the artistic framework?
Yeah, he uses definitely the plot to get along his evidence, as we explained earlier. But then again, he does have to implement this like propagandistic parts of the novel to get across his own message.
And so strangely, the article that had the most traditional point of view is also the most debated.
In contrast to the previous articles, which have claimed that Sinclair is either not a naturalist or a poor naturalist, this article categorizes Sinclair as a naturalist and gives reasons as to why his writing is consistent with the conventions of this writing style. And so the reason for the inconsistency with the previous articles and naturalism is that they take a social or economic viewpoint, whereas this article takes a discursive viewpoint. So this theme of discursive determinism is seen probably most prominently through Jurgis's character, and we see this idea of cultural literacy first through Jurgis's decision to have a traditional Lithuanian wedding. And in this decision, he is obviously still clinging to his Lithuanian culture of familial values over monetary things, but in America, that's not the way it runs. And so this this contradiction between the two cultures definitely puts them at a disadvantage. And through this experience, and definitely other ones, Jurgis realizes that he's gonna have to learn the ways of America if he wants to succeed.
Yeah, and you especially see this in Jurgis's desire to learn English because his lack of knowledge of the English language really puts the family at a disadvantage. It causes them to get ripped off when they're buying the house. It causes him to not be active in his union meetings and thus get value out of the union meetings. And once he begins to learn English, though, he seems to progress through whatever culture he's in. Like, especially in the criminal culture, he's able to talk to people. He's able to get things done, and he's not as easily swindled as he once was.
And so finally you follow him through to the end where he gains socialism as he gets the socialist culture. So the criminal culture kind of shows him adapting to the culture of America and the monetary culture of America and Packingtown especially. But then the socialist acculturization is him becoming truly an American, getting into the American culture, because it's him exploiting the political values of America. And so the ending shows that what the end product of this process slowly from not having any culture to having the Packingtown culture to the American culture. Yet with determinism, there always kind of has to be this slow, and it shows that while Urias has come so far, the fact that he fades shows that he hasn't completely adapted to the linguistic and culture of America yet, because he fades. He can't quite communicate totally. We began by asking whether or not the jungle deserves literary merit, and the previous 4 articles have laid out the arguments for and against the merit of Sinclair's writing. And from carefully analyzing these arguments, we have concluded that Sinclair does indeed deserve literary acclaim for various reasons.
Yeah, I kind of came to the conclusion 2 different ways. One, even though like he himself wrote a very narrow ending, I believe that's part of his literary merit, because he had a goal, and that goal was to convince people that socialism was the way to go to better the lives of workers. And if that's his prerogative, he definitely achieved that through his writing, and that makes his propaganda art in a way. So I think he deserves literary merit for that. And also, he included a lot of deeper value in his writing, because like with the discursive determinism thing, like there's definitely some deeper themes in there with determinism, and you can interpret that however you like, and I think that also attributes to his merit as a writer.
So to expand on that, I think that the purpose of art is to bring about an emotion on your reader, and so I think that he does this through his like gruesome descriptions of Packingtown, through his description of the plight of the characters. I think that he makes the reader empathize with these characters, and so it makes his argument for socialism a lot stronger than it would as just a pamphlet or any other form of propaganda.
And what I got from all of these was Teaching the Good kind of presented the idea of, will the propagandistic view of will the propaganda in Upton Sinclair's The Jungle narrow the students' or any reader's interpretation of what they read? And each of the articles analyzed the jungle in a completely different way. The second one went as for its merit, but it took a rhetorical path. The third article was just all about the propaganda and very much against it. And well, not very much, but it was definitely took the idea that the propaganda didn't help the jungle. And then the fourth one didn't even talk about the propaganda, but analyzed a subplot. And so theoretically, the propaganda may have not narrowed the point of view for the jungle, but it really didn't, as observed, but through all the different articles. There's so many ways to do it, and that's kind of the nice thing about writing. There's always multiple ways to interpret.